name is Flash.
I'm beyond shocked I'm still talking about DCEU movie The Flash after a couple of weeks. You know, it just had such a bad opening and it looked like things were going to get much worse. I kind of talked about that a little bit on the live stream, hoping I could just forget about the damn movie. And every time I go, let's just move on beyond The Flash, it actually bottoms out worse than it did before. The opening was absolutely putrid, but now this week we've had 3 things happen with this movie and I have to talk about them because you knew it was going to be bad. I think we all kind of knew it was going to be bad, seeing the way that the numbers were trending, but we never thought it could get this bad. I imagine David Zaslav and James Gunn are pinching themselves, wishing that they hadn't declared that this Flash movie was the greatest superhero movie in the history of the world, because that is not proving out at all. People hate this movie and they're not going to it. Let's talk about just how bad it's gotten for The Flash. In a box office upset, Sony holdover Spider-Man Across the Spider-Verse edged out Pixar's Elemental to win the weekend all the way in its 4th outing. The news for DC and Warner Brothers' big-budget superhero pick The Flash, which opened last weekend opposite Elemental to a sobering $55.1 million, grew worse as it fell off 72% to $15.3 million for a domestic cume of $87.6 million. Unlike Elemental, The Flash received poor exit scores. The studios had hoped for a decline of just 55%. Insiders concede the film, starring Ezra Miller, is a huge miss and is being rejected by audiences on a wholesale basis. Well, I'm glad the insiders are finally willing to concede what was perfectly obvious, like when they started doing the Wednesday and Thursday previews, that there was something not right with this movie. People were not interested in it. It didn't matter how many Batman cameos they put in this Flash movie. It wasn't going to overcome the fact that Ezra Miller, who basically has a 0 Q rating with people worldwide, was the starring guy in the movie, and nobody wanted to support him. It wasn't going to be able to overcome the fact that the DCEU itself is a dead brand. They've already told us this. There's no anticipation for anything ever coming out of this Flash movie. And it turns out, once people actually got to see the movie, the word of mouth was very poor. I have talked to people that liked the movie and said, you know what, it was enjoyable, but it looked like crap. And that's been the biggest complaint about the Flash movie, other than the fact that it's completely incoherent, is that the CGI itself is just atrocious. A 72% decline on the second weekend for a movie that opened well under expectations is really, really bad news. And it only gets worse from here, folks. Yes, we haven't bottomed out yet on this Flash news. Chew on this. Despite the hammering Dwayne Johnson's box office savior Black Adam took from the press, that movie's first 10 days, $110.9 million, are 27% ahead of The Flash. Black Adam's second weekend was also bigger at $27.4 million, a 59% decrease compared to The Flash's 74%. Was it wise to nix Black Adam 2? Flash's running total at 10 days is pacing 2% behind that of Green Lantern at $88.9 million. That DC Bob, which starred Ryan Reynolds, posted a second weekend of $18 million, a drop of 66%, also better than The Flash. Black Adam finaled at $168.1 million, while Green Lantern ended its gross at $116.6 million. It's so bad now that The Flash is absolutely getting walloped by Black Adam, the movie that everyone pointed and laughed at The Rock about because it did so poorly. It's actually not just trailing behind Black Adam, like it's getting smoked by Black Adam, and no one really liked that movie either. It's getting so bad that we're having to talk about Green Lantern, one of the worst superhero movies in the history of superhero movies. I don't even want to think about that thing. How did they get Ola right and everything else about the movie wrong? We're talking about Green Lantern here. We're talking about Black Adam, and maybe they shouldn't have nixed the sequel movie that was planned, because maybe Black Adam is actually the big success of the DCEU. And really it has been for the last 5 years. It's the highest grossing DCEU movie since Aquaman, which came out in 2018. Now, it didn't do as well as the Batman and it didn't do as well as the Joker, but those aren't DCEU movies. And now The Flash is becoming even more infamous because you're having to compare it to some of the biggest disasters in Warner Brothers and DC Studios history. Well, I guess it was DC Films back then. And we haven't bottomed out. It actually gets worse somehow. To put things into perspective, in terms of total money lost, the 2 largest flops in all of cinema are Disney's John Carter and The Lone Ranger, which ended up in the red to the tune of around $200 million each. The Scarlet Speedster solo debut boasts the same kind of budget as those failures and is following a similar trajectory in terms of its day-to-day earnings. So there might be a new kid on the block being welcomed into the 7th circle of financial hell in the very near future. Things have gotten so bad that after just 10 days of playing on the big screen, Fandango issued a buy one get one free offer that would secure you 2 tickets to The Flash at half the cost, with the tactics attempting to drum up any sort of nominal business scraping the bottom of the barrel in record time. Okay, so we're beyond comparing it to Green Lantern and Black Adam. We're actually comparing it to John Carter and the Lone Ranger. And this is absolutely mind-blowing stuff. The fact that Disney had a production budget of $250 million for a Lone Ranger movie starring Armie Hammer with Johnny Depp as, I believe, Tonto, or a John Carter movie starring Taylor Kitsch or whatever the hell his name was, who they decided to force feed us that he was a big movie star, but he never really was. Putting $250 million or whatever into those movies was absolutely insane. I like John Carter. It's a really cool series. I like A Princess of Mars and all that kind of stuff. But it wasn't exactly a worldwide known IP, and it was pretty ballsy of Disney to actually do that. And I will maintain to this day that I like that John Carter movie. As far as big budget movies that didn't do very well, it may be the best one they ever made. It's certainly better than like Waterworld and some of those other big time flops. The Lone Ranger was not good. It was actually pretty bad. So now we're comparing The Flash to the 2 biggest flops in movie history. So there's a good chance that this thing might actually break the record and lose more money than those 2 movies. But now Warner Brothers and Fandango are having to give tickets away just to entice people to maybe consider going to see the movie. That's how bad the word of mouth is on this film. And I can't stress just how stupid it was for James Gunn to go along with David Zaslav and put his name behind this Flash movie. Zaslav said it was the greatest superhero movie of all times. I believe Gunn said something more attuned to, it's a really, really good movie. And that kind of ruins their credibility. It wasn't a very smart thing to do. And I imagine when James Gunn saw it, he probably said, you know what, maybe the story is enjoyable, but it looks like crap. Maybe it's not a great idea to put our stamp of approval on this movie, because we do have this DCU that we're planning out, and we don't actually want to kill it before it even begins at this point. Less than 2 weeks into the movie, they're having to give it away, buy one, take one free on Fandango. And you're like, Wes, it can't get worse than that for The Flash, can it? Certainly, the movie has hit rock bottom now. Absolutely not. I've got one more story to talk about. There is, in fact, one circle of hell lower than where Flash already is, and that came out today. With ticket sales cratering, The Flash may end up as one of the biggest Hollywood financial losses of all time, and potentially failed to even make its marketing budget back. So it's perhaps understandable that Warner Brothers is now dragging The Flash behind the woodshed and going old yeller on its theatrical run. The Flash is set to release on digital platforms on July 18th. It's worth noting that the original plan for The Flash was for it to arrive on digital sometime in September, so being available for home viewing just 1 month from its theatrical release is as close as you'll get to an admission of total defeat from Warner Brothers. So it had one of the worst second week drops in superhero movie history. It's dragging behind Black Adam and Green Lantern, 2 of the worst movies in Warner Brothers history, 2 of the worst superhero movies ever. Certainly Green Lantern is. It's actually competing with John Carter in Lone Ranger to potentially be the biggest flop in Hollywood history. They're having to give tickets away just to entice people to consider seeing the movie, and it's going to be on streaming 30 days after it arrived in theaters. Ladies and gentlemen, that is absolutely rock bottom. It gets no worse than that. They actually have to admit there's no chance for us to actually make any money back. And in that article, they mentioned it might not make its marketing budget back. That means they're not talking about the actual film production budget. So it might actually lose $250 million. It's insane how this happened. How did this thing just fall to crap? I remember when that trailer came out during the Super Bowl and you saw Keaton as Batman and Batfleck's in there, and there was all these Easter eggs and member berries. I was like, people are going to eat this up. But I guess the audience was a little bit more discerning than David Zaslav, James Gunn, and Warner Brothers gave them credit for. They saw through the BS. They didn't want to support Ezra Miller. They could see this was going nowhere, and member berries just aren't enough when it comes to superhero movies to get people back into the theater. You have to provide them something unique, something different. And at this point, having 55 superhero movies, I believe, in the last decade, it's going to be real hard to do anything unique and anything different. And, it's just not looking good. And I do feel bad for James Gunn. I imagine he was forced to put his seal of approval on that Flash movie. And I bet he regrets it right here, right now, because he's put his reputation behind one of the biggest flops in cinematic history, which might end up being the biggest flop in the history of movies. And what does this mean for James Gunn? Well, I don't know that a lot of people are going to actually give him any credibility. Maybe they're going to say, you know what? He thought The Flash was great. Do I even want to support his DCU? And that's just one of the many problems facing James Gunn and the DCU kicking off with Superman Legacy. I broke it all down right here, my thoughts on this, and why I believe the DCU is already dead. And we are about 3 years away from the first movie even coming out. There's also a link in the video description.